Welcome everyone to this IWB webinar series. I'm Blake. I'm a wealth strategist here at Money Insights. You're going to be hearing from Rod, president of Money Insights, here shortly. And before we kick this off, I just want to give a reminder, if you've been on these webinars before, or if this is completely new to you, what exactly we're doing here. So with this webinar series, what we're attempting to do on a monthly basis is just provide some additional educational content when it comes to utilizing some of our core strategies. Today, what we'll be talking about is really related to the investment optimizer strategy, and specifically how you can utilize your policy in what we call phase two of the kind of the life cycle of utilizing the investment optimizer, which is kind of in the retirement cash flow. So we're going to deep dive into some of those topics today. I'm pretty excited because this is a topic, as we're meeting with people on a regular basis, whether it's initially or on annual reviews that we're doing, a topic that's coming up a lot. And often, we'll have conversations on the front end of, getting the strategy set up. But then as time goes on, you might forget some of these things. So either this will be some new information. Hopefully for a lot of you, it's kind of a reminder about where we're going. And as the strategy continues, kind of what the second phase of it looks like. So with that being said, Rod, I will turn it over to you. And actually, before we do that, let me say this. We intend this to be a place where you can ask any questions. So I'll be monitoring the chat. Feel free to drop them in if it makes sense to touch base and bring it up as we're going. I'm happy to do that. So as things are going, if you have any questions that come up, whether it's about what we're presenting on or things outside of that, we're more than happy to answer that. And we'll have a Q&A session at the end, but drop it in the chat as we're going along. And with that being said, Rod, I will turn it over to you here.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks everyone for being here. I'm excited about this topic because we focus so much of our attention when we talk about the investment optimizer on the investments, which I guess there's a reason for that, right? That's the exciting part where I get to add an extra layer of profitability to the investing that I'm doing. And quite frankly, that's where most people are when they get started in the strategy. And so that's where most of our clients are as we speak at this moment. And yet we have been doing this for long enough that we have clients who are maybe pushing past that, moving into a place where they're not doing as much investing. They probably aren't, cutting it off completely, and we'll give you a little more context on the types of situations we're seeing, but doing less investing, more living off of the proceeds of the kinds of things that they've been investing in. So it's been something that's come up recently a few times, and so we thought, well, let's build out some context for people. So regardless of where you are, what stage you are in the life cycle of the investment optimizer strategy, I think you can benefit from kind of seeing it and seeing how it plays out. And there's no one size fits all. We're going to talk about principles. We're going to show some examples, but you can personalize this to yourself. And of course, as with anything, we're more than happy to get on a call with somebody if you're hearing about this and you're like, okay, this is all great. I want to see how it applies a little more to myself. Great, let us know. We're more than happy to have that conversation, whether you're a current client or whether you're someone who's been thinking about it. Maybe you haven't yet made the decision to do it or not, but this may help, hopefully, kind of give you a little more context for it. So just so you know, during this presentation, I'm going to be using I call it my whiteboard screen, which is off to my right. So if I'm not looking towards you all, just know it's because I'm a little distracted looking at my screen. So, okay, but first we're going to talk about the 3 stages of the investment optimizer. We're going to call it life cycle. Okay, so someone sets up a new policy, and for anyone who may not be familiar with the investment optimizer, this is kind of your first time hearing about it. We have a lot of educational information that you can tap into and learn more. But just as a kind of brief overview, it's a way that we can set up a optimized life insurance policy as what we call the opportunity fund, or the place where I'm flowing money in and out of my investments. Typically, when we meet with someone, they're flowing money in and out of a savings account or money market account because it's safe and it's liquid, right? Money's available when I'm ready for it. I grab it and I go and invest. But it just has some inefficiencies. And one of those is that it's not really growing much, right? Hopefully I'm earning some interest, but usually it's not much. It's not very tax efficient, et cetera. So we set up these specialized life insurance policies where we're minimizing cost, maximizing the way the cash value grows, so that then we have a bucket that's similar to the money market account or the savings account in the sense that it's very much liquid and very safe. But what we're adding is a consistent growth mechanism there so that the underlying cash value is continuing to grow. So that as I'm building the account up and then I'm going to go out and invest, it's working for me while I'm doing that. When I'm ready to take the money, I'm actually taking a loan. The insurance companies offer a loan using my cash value as collateral. I use the loan. That's what I go and invest with, but my money stays there and continues to grow. So my money's working for me literally in two places at the same time. So, and then as I create cash flow or some sort of return on my investment, I flow that money back towards the plan. Technically, I'm paying down the loan, but strategically, I'm freeing up the money again so I can go back out and invest in something else. Okay. So I know many of you on this that are listening have probably heard me, describe that many times. But I just wanted to give some basic context. So if there's anyone who's hearing this for the first time, you have, what we mean when we say optimizing your investment strategy. That means that I have the life insurance policy in place. I've been putting money into it. I'm using that money to go out and invest and flow through my investments and add an additional layer of return in addition to what my actual investments are bringing back to me. Then my underlying policy is also growing simultaneously. Okay. And we refer that as phase one. Okay. We often don't talk about phase one because that's just the crux of really what we're talking about when we often present this. But in the context of this conversation, in the life cycle of the plan, that's phase one. Phase two is I get to a place where I'm shifting. Most Americans call it retirement. We put it in quotes here because most of our clients don't think of retirement in the same way, that I'm walking away from my working environment completely, with a set date that I retire. For most people we work with, they're going to continue to invest, but they're maybe slowing down on the investments, or maybe they're living off of more of the cash flows that they create from their investments to replace the working income. Maybe they slow down in their work situation, but they're still, in the office, 1 day a week or 3 days a week instead of 5 or whatever. And so that's more of what we tend to see in this. Again, we're using retirement in quotes. But that's phase two. So as it relates to the policy itself, what's happened during phase one is I've built up all of this money in my cash value, and that now is available to me in phase two to use for tax-free income in retirement. And so while I may have these investments that are cash flowing, that maybe becomes my primary source of income during my retirement, I also have access to the cash value, and I can turn that into an additional stream of income during retirement from the cash value. So that's phase two. And then what we call phase three is basically I die. And the life insurance policy being what it is, I've built up a bunch of this cash value. Maybe I used a bunch of it in retirement as income. But now there's this death benefit that passes on to my heirs in however I designate it. It could go directly to my children or a charity. I can have it go into a trust where the trust now has instructions on what's going to happen with the money that's there, and that becomes an additional asset that's owned by the trust. So however that looks as I'm passing on to the next generation, that's phase three. So that's the life cycle. Phase one, I'm using the money for my investing and actively adding to it, building up this account. Phase two, I'm now using what I've built up as another source of income, tax-free income in retirement. And then phase three, I pass away and the death benefit passes on to my heirs. Okay. So that's our basic context. And what I want to do is talk a little bit about this transition from phase one to phase two. And I kind of hinted at this earlier, but it's not like there's typically, like in our experience with our clients, there's not typically a set date where someone is working full-time, living off of their working income, and then they flip a switch and they're no longer working. Now they're living off of just whatever they've built up. Okay. Again, that's the traditional way that people think of retirement. But because we work with a lot of people who invest in alternative assets, and for a lot of those people, their goal is I want to create enough passive cash flow outside of my working, my work life so that I can replace the income that comes from my work life. And because of that, there's this transition, right? Where it's not flipping the switch. It's a more over time, and in a lot of cases over many years, um, which is the beauty of it, right? And so if you think about that from the standpoint of now the policy and the role that it's playing, this investment optimizer strategy, this policy, the role it's playing in your world where it's working toward helping you for your investments, and but then you're getting to a place where you're maybe doing less in terms of new investments. You're just mainly living off of the cash flow that you get from those investments. And so when as people are starting to do that, um, initially they in most cases still have more cash flow coming in than they need to live off of. And so they'll continue to flow that money into their policy as they already were. The goal being to pay down any loans that they've had that they were using for their investing. And basically, I think of it like refilling the bucket. So now it's ready to produce that income in these more retirement years. But that's again, you see the bullet point. There's no age restrictions. There's nothing that says, oh, 59 and a half or anything like that, like a 401k or something like that. This can happen anytime you want. If you started your investment journey at 35 and you're now 50 and you're saying, hey, I'm ready to make this transition, great. You can start accessing that money in terms of phase two anytime you want. Let's talk about the second bullet point here, option to stop contributing premiums, because this has become anyway a little bit of a, I don't know, stumbling block for people to really grasp, kind of wrap their minds around what that means. So I've been in phase one, I've been funding the policy, I've been using the money to invest, but now I'm at this place where I no longer want to continue capitalizing my opportunity fund. Now I'm just going to let the money flow inside of it. And so what does that mean? Well, as you may recall, we have when we set up these policies, we create what we call a funding range. So here in a minute, we're going to look at an example where we show someone putting 100,000 a year into their policy, but they're not committed. They don't have to put 100,000 a year into it. They could put anywhere between, in this example, it's going to be about 22,000 as a minimum, up to 100,000 a year as a maximum. Okay, so that's their funding range. Well, if they say, well, I'm not continuing to put new money into it like I was in the early years of phase one, but this 21,000 still needs to be paid somehow, right? You don't have to pay out of pocket to do that. You've built up a plenty of value in the policy with growth that's happening on top of what's in your cash value, that you can use the cash value to cover that minimum, that 22,000 in this example. And most of that is actually just going back to the cash value anyway. In other words, when we talk about funding range and this 21,000 as a minimum, really only maybe 5 or 6,000 of that is going to cost. The rest of it's just going and building the cash value. So even maybe I should say that a different way. Once I'm more than 2 years into my policy and I'm paying, even if I pay just that minimum portion of that kind of minimum into the funding range, that base premium, that even if that was the only money I put into my policy, I'm still building cash value, right? So most of that, 15, 16,000 of that is going to directly to the cash value where it's going to keep growing. And some of that money came off as cost. But because I've already put a bunch of money into it and have money there that's already growing, I'm way outpacing that cost in terms of what I'm growing. Okay. So we say option to stop contributing premiums. That means I'm not paying them out of pocket. I do continue to cover those until we'll get kind of talk a little bit later. I get to a place as early as year 8, but really anytime after that, I get to a place where I can even remove that minimum payment. But at least until then, we're going to let it continue to cover that, but we just do it internally. The policy covers it itself and continues to grow, self-sustaining, self-contained, continuing to do its thing. And then this last bullet point is when I get to a point where I say, okay, I'm not going to be contributing anything to the policy, then there are 2 options that we can choose from. The first one is called premium offset, and that just means I'm going to let my cash value cover the premium for me. So I'm not contributing out of pocket, let the policy take care of itself. And then there's also this reduced paid up, and this is what I was talking about a second ago, where I can't do it before year 8, but in as early as year 8 and anytime after that, we can do this reduced paid up. And we'll show an example here where we're doing this, where I'm reducing the amount of insurance on the policy, and that removes the requirement that I pay even that minimum. And by doing that, then I can make the cash value grow a little bit better, more income later, etc. But I have less death benefit. I'm choosing to reduce the death benefit to make that happen. And we'll show some examples about, side by side what that looks like and how someone might choose to do one versus the other. Okay, so let's actually look at some illustrations. And the first one we're going to look at is probably going to be very familiar to a lot of you who, if you've met with us, you have a policy or we've shown you illustrations. This is going to look familiar because we typically build it where, if you look at this premium outlay column, we fund for 7 years and then we show no more funding going in. And our purpose behind that is we have to pick a number. We have to pick a number of years that's going to be funded. And 7 is kind of somewhat arbitrary, somewhat not. But on the one hand, we want to show enough money going in so people can see the power of the strategy, how it's building the cash value, and I have access to that money. I'm using it for investing. But I also don't want to make people feel like they have to keep putting money in forever, because that's often a misnomer that people just think, well, all whole life policy, I just have to keep funding it for the rest of my life. And that's just not true. We get to a place pretty quickly. In this example, by year 3, if I've put in 100,000 a year for even 3 years, I could be done funding it if I wanted to, and kind of use some of these principles I just talked about in terms of letting the cash value cover that minimum 21,000. And even when I do that, the cash value will continue to grow. The net gain year over year, even while it's continuing to cover those costs, because I have more growth in the policy than I have to worry about as far as the costs. So I show this first because this is the common initial starting point for most of you, because that's what we show, right? But like I said, we show this because we have to pick a number of years we're going to fund it. But when we set up a new policy, we almost always will set it up so that you can continue funding it as long as you want. So you're not restricted to only funding it for 7 years. Like I said, you don't even have to pay it. You're not required to pay it for 7 years. But because we show it that way, then a lot of people get into their minds, oh, I'm going to fund this for 7 years and then I'm going to be done. And as we're having our regular strategic reviews with people, we remind them, no, you don't have to continue funding all the way through 7 years. And on the flip side, you don't have to stop funding after the 7 years. You can continue funding it really as long as you want. And ultimately, it's for as long as you're continuing in phase 1, you're still setting aside money for your investing, then you would want to continue funding the policy, continue putting money into that system that you're using for your investments. But let's take this same policy, same structure. It's the exact same person, exact same policy. And let's say that they, instead of stopping after 7 years, they kept funding it. So they're going to fund for 15 years. So the 45-year-old just made it easy. It's like, oh, okay, well, they fund for 15 years. That gets them to age 60. Okay. So now the difference is everything up to this point is exactly identical to the policy we just looked at, because it's the same person, same policy, same structure. They just decided to keep funding it because they're still investing. They still are setting that money aside for their investing. They want to keep doing that. So they continue putting money aside all the way through year 15. And then what? Okay, so this first scenario we're going to look at is, remember I showed 2 different kind of alternate options that I can choose from. One is premium offset, which means that the policy is paying the 21,000 minimum for me. The second one is the reduced paid up. So this one is the first one, the premium offset. So you'll notice in the premium outlay column, zeros. I'm no longer putting money into this policy, okay? But you'll notice in the total premium column, there's this $21,000 sitting over here that is being paid. It is being covered, but it's happening just from the cash value. So, but you'll notice because of all of the money that I have in there that's continuing to grow based on the guaranteed interest and the dividend, that my year over year growth, if I focus on this cash value column, year over year, I'm gaining ground, right? So even though I didn't put any money into it in that year, I still earned $114,000, right? It covered that kind of internal cost of the portion of that 21,000 that is cost, but still gained, right? So year over year, you'll notice it's just continuing to grow and grow, and um, and then you'll notice over here on the death benefit that from the time I stopped funding next year, the death benefit went higher, right? I didn't put any more money in, but because of this kind of idea that the growth of the cash value is continuing to push higher, well, that's also going to continue to push the death benefit higher as well, even though I'm not putting any money into it out of pocket. Okay, so that's the first scenario. That's if I go premium offset. And this would be if someone says, well, I'm not going to put any more money into it, but I want the death benefit to stay higher. I don't want to lose death benefit in this change, then great. We take care of it. It continues to grow. Well, what if we instead do the second option, which is what's called the reduced paid up? So again, premium outlay, same funding for 15 years, outlay goes to zero, but you'll notice the total premium now goes to zero as well. In other words, I no longer have to have this kind of minimum $21,000 nut that I have to crack, right? Um, but simultaneously, what happened is if we look over here at the death benefit, we dropped by almost $1 million of that death benefit. So it went from a little under 5.1 to about 4.1. And the result is that cash value grows a little bit better. So if we focus on this column right here, in that year 16, it's a $120,000 gain. If I compare that to the previous one, for that same year, it was 114, almost 115,000 of gain. So because I reduced the insurance on the policy, therefore reducing the costs, then you'll see it grows a little bit better than it otherwise would. But again, I gave up $1 million of insurance to do it. So that's kind of when someone gets to that point, that becomes part of the conversation. Does it make sense to reduce the amount of insurance on the policy so that I can have greater gains in the cash value, or does it make more sense to not? And that, you don't have to decide that today. Again, the same policy, same structure, same person. They get to make these decisions as they go along the way. They don't have to commit now. Okay. So hopefully that's helpful, getting us to the point. So now we're transitioning from this phase one into phase two, and hopefully this kind of gives you some context on what you could expect as far as that goes. Now what I want to do is talk about what are reasonable expectations as far as income goes once you get there. Okay. Well, let's first talk about the way that I take the income out of the plan. And this is the kind of typical way that we go, where initial money that I take out, I'll take as withdrawals. So I built up all this cash value. I'm now taking some income out. I'm actually going to take a withdrawal of cash out of my cash value. And this kind of FIFO, that just means that's an accounting term that means first in, first out. So from a taxable standpoint, I get to take out the money that I put in first before I have to touch any of the gains. And because I paid the tax on that money before I put it in, now when I'm taking it back out, it's not taxable. So tax-free money coming out as withdrawals up to the amount of my basis. Okay, so for the example we just looked at, I paid 100,000 a year for 15 years. That's a basis of 1.5 million that I put in. When I turn around and start taking that income out and I take withdrawals, I'm first taking my money first, so I can take up to 1.5 million of that back out, and I don't pay any tax on it. Okay. Once I've done that, if I continue taking withdrawals, then it would become taxable. But we don't want that, right? Like I said, we can build it so it's tax-free all the way through. So the way that we do that is we then switch over to using a loan to take that income out. And the context of the loan in this setting is different than when we talk about it when we're investing, right? I take the loan, I use that money to invest, I want to pay that money back and refill the bucket, go back out and invest in something else. In this example, when I'm looking at it from an income standpoint, I'm not worried about making payments back, right? I'm living off that money. I don't want to have to be making any payments back, and that's okay, because the loan will accrue interest over time. and it'll compound, right? That's one of the things that we talked about in phase one. We want to avoid compounding interest. In this case, we're okay because simultaneously I have the money in my cash value that's acting as collateral for that loan, and it's continuing to grow as well and compound. So it's just the growth of the cash value offsets the increase in the interest that's accruing on the loan side. And so that works out okay because ultimately when I pass away, the death benefit pays out income tax free, and that income tax free death benefit is going to pay off the loan, the outstanding loan that I have sitting there. And so so that kind of completes the cycle and makes it so that I took all my income out income tax free, and the death benefit also paid out income tax free and goes to my heirs, and so no one ever pays the tax on that. So when we talk about it, that these life insurance policies can be kind of like a Roth in the sense that I put in after tax money, but everything else coming back out is income tax free. That's the complete cycle of how we make that work. Okay.
Rod, if you don't mind, before
Yeah.
you go to the next one, I'm going to hit on Todd's question here. And he's saying, is there a third option to keep the death benefit level, thus decreasing the cost, but not eliminating them? Do you want to hit on that or you want me to?
Yeah. So the answer is it would be kind of like a hybrid of what I showed. And we're looking at this with somebody right now. So he said, I don't want my death benefit to go down, but I'm also okay if it doesn't go up. So what we can do is, and let me actually go back to that. It looks more like this one where the total premium will still show this 21,000. Excuse me, we're offsetting it and as a starting point. But then we say, okay, but how much would you need to put in order to maintain the death benefit? In this case, it's increasing because we went a full 15 years of funding before we offset it. There's enough growth in there to continue pushing it higher. But if we had done it back somewhere in here and didn't want to do the reduced paid up, we didn't want to reduce the death benefit. Well, it may not have enough cash value growth to keep the death benefit level. And so if we said, okay, but so you might need to pay in whatever, $10,000 a year or something in order to maintain the death benefit at roughly that same level, but it's not the full 21, right? So, so there is a scenario where we can do, a hybrid somewhere between the two. It's a great question. And as I talked about before, this is a dynamic conversation that we're having as we go. Someone could decide, oh, I'm ready to offset, but I don't want to reduce the death benefit. Okay, great. Then you put the extra, whatever, 10, 15,000 in per year. And then a few years go past, you're like, hey, I don't want to put this 15,000 a year in. What does that look like? Okay, great. We just look at it and make a decision, based on that. So it very much is a fluid conversation as we go. We're showing specific examples, and so we have to make certain assumptions going in, but there are, varying levels of different things you could do.
And I might add one point to that, Rod, because the premium offset, the nice part with it is just as Rod explained, we have options to go back and forth. So you could offset for a couple years and then go back and start adding more funds if you wanted to. Whereas when we use the reduced paid up option, that's a one-time decision, and the policy is therefore set up that it can never accept any more premium after that. So you can't use the reduced paid up and then 5 years later say, hey, actually, I want to add the base premium or I want to fully fund 100K. Once you use that, it's done. The premium offset, we have a lot of flexibility in terms of whether you want to keep funding it or not. So if you do get in that situation, I mean, of course, we'll have a conversation with you, but just know, there is some flexibility depending on what option we pick with the reduced paid up. Of course, you can still flow money in and out of the loan. So I'm not saying you're not using the policy or anything like that, but we cannot add any more contributions.
Great. Yeah, that's perfect. That's a good point. Okay. So now let's look at an example where we start taking income. So the first one we want to look at is we funded for those full 15 years. We did the reduced paid up, death benefit dropped like we saw, and then we start taking the income. Okay. And in this example, we said, well, what if we take the income? What's a reasonable amount that we could take, knowing that I want it to last at least until I'm age 90. Okay, again, for this example, it could be very, different depending on you and your personal circumstances, but that's the assumption we were making on this one. So now, as you look at the death benefit and the cash value, you'll notice that it's reducing as I go. In other words, I've said, well, I've built this value up. Now I want to use it as a source of tax-free income in retirement. And we said, well, what's the max I can take and reasonably expect to stay that at that level income until I'm 90. And so $129,000 is that number. And so in a sense, we're kind of like drawing down a portion of the account as we go, so that we can, take the maximum amount of income. Okay. But you'll notice in both cases, cash value and death benefit are reducing or going down as we go. And like we talked about a little bit ago, I'm starting the income coming out as withdrawals. Okay. So we have this new column that popped up that's showing a loan balance, and it's 0 for now until I continue on taking that income. And then you'll notice right here is the year where we've now taken out 1.5 million, the basis, and it's switching over to now where it's taking the income as a loan. In that first year, it's a hybrid, right? So initially I was still taking the withdrawals, and then mid-year I switched over and ended up taking 50,000 of it as loan. And you'll notice that again, cash value, death benefit, they're still going down. But then let's say I pass away at age 90. Okay. So now I have a $4 million loan balance that's sitting there, but I have, 4.2 million, 4.3 million of cash value total, right? And then over here, the death benefit is showing what's the net amount that got paid out to the family. So even after the death benefit paid off the loan, there was still $750,000 of death benefit that went to the family. So what that means is the total death benefit was roughly, 4.8 million, something like that. So that's kind of how that plays out if I did the reduced paid up. Okay. Now the next one we want to look at is same scenario, but I want to keep the death benefit higher. Again, because I'm taking the income, it's still going to trail off either way, but I didn't want to see that immediate reduction of $1 million drop off. So in this case, because I left the insurance higher, there's a little bit higher cost. So instead of 129,000 a year of income, it's going to be 125,000 a year of income. And over here, that minimum 21,000 is continuing to be paid from the cash value. But like I talked about earlier, it's not a $21,000 cost of the 21. It's just a fraction of that is going to cost, which that the amount or the portion of that that's a cost is going to ratchet up a little bit each year. But because I've built up so much value inside of my cash value, again, the gains are way offsetting. There's a lot more gains than those costs. So I take the 125, I see that kind of trail off in terms of the income. Similarly, we switch over. It took a little bit longer before we were ready to start switching over to the loan. Another kind of a year later, just because of a little bit less income coming out, it took longer to work through the basis. But then we switch over to the loan, and then at age 90, when I pass away, $3.8 million loan outstanding, and about 730,000 death benefit that passes on to my heirs. And again, I know I've said this before, but I just want to say it again. This is an example, a static situation where someone just said, "Hey, send me the same amount of money every year, whatever that is reasonable to do based on what I have. Let's do it." But it's not an all or nothing thing. You don't have to. That doesn't have to be the solution. You could say, "Hey, send me 50 grand of income this year," right? Or you could say, "Hey, I'm good with my income, my regular income, just from my other sources, my cash flow from investments, what I did save up in a 401k, Social Security, whatever. I'm good on my regular income. I'll just tap into this anytime I have some sort of additional expense. I'm buying a new car, I'm going on a special trip or something like that. I don't want it to mess up my tax plan, etc. I'll use this." And so just on an as needed basis, I can take the money out. And obviously to the extent that I take less income, then I have higher cash value, higher death benefit. And so it's going to be somewhere between what we see here versus what we were looking at earlier here. where we were showing stop paying but not taking income, right? And you notice the death benefit continued to grow. And then this is actually maybe a little bit of the reverse of what Todd was saying. So in this case, I actually could take some income if I wanted to maintain a level death benefit and say, well, I want to keep, 5 million of insurance on the plan. So I'll take some income each year, but only enough uh, to be able to continue to maintain that 5 million of insurance, right? So it could be something like that. Very, very flexible on the way that works. Okay. All right. So hopefully this is helpful for people to hear kind of these different scenarios. I realize in some ways we're getting a little more into the weeds than we normally do in these presentations, but that's kind of the point. We want to peel back the layers and help people see that as they go and they're anticipating, slowing down and retiring at some age and what that will look like. Well, what does that look like? Um, and then we talked about the impact on the cash value and the death benefit. One other piece that I wanted to hit on just really quickly, the chronic illness rider or this kind of long-term care element of these insurance policies that we have, especially on these types of policies, we're accelerating a portion of the death benefit to take as long-term care. And when I do that, I do see a reduction in my death benefit, obviously, because that was part of it, but I also see a reduction in my cash value. So what I just wanted to make really clear is if the long-term care portion of your policy is a priority, then you would want to take less income as like proactively, hey, I'm going to be taking this income because you would want to leave more value left in the policy so that if later it came up and you needed to use the chronic illness rider, that you'd have more value left and available to you, right? Because if I'm drawing it down and my cash value and death benefit are just getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and then I'm 85 years old and I need long-term care and I want to tap into that benefit, I'll just have less available to me because of the income I took than I otherwise would. And that's just something to be aware of. Um, again, it's just trade-offs, right? Prioritizing one income or the other, long-term care or somewhere in between. All right. Well, that is what I had prepared. So let's switch over and do more of kind of our Q&A portion of this. And for this, it can be a question about anything. Obviously, if you have any questions about what we just went through, a little more clarity would be helpful, etc. Then pop your questions in the Q&A. But if you're also sitting here and you're like, oh, but I actually have a question about the investment optimizer that has nothing to do with this conversation or Capital Avalanche or anything else related to what we do, we're more than happy to field any questions. This is kind of our time of the month where we offer to be an open book, answer any questions that anybody has. So feel free to pop anything in.
Great. So as we're doing that, I'm gonna hit on a question from Miguel.
Okay.
And he was asking this kind of earlier as you got going, but is there a strategy to be had if we want to use the investment optimizer or the other programs that we have and use money that's in a solo 401k to fund the policies?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the answer is that money in a solo 401k or any qualified plan can be used for a policy. There are limited examples where the policy can exist inside of the solo 401k. It does exist, especially if you're setting up your own solo 401k, which is really what you're doing. You're the business owner, you're setting it up for yourself. And you can dictate, yes, life insurance can be held inside of the plan. And that's the case, then yeah, you can actually hold a policy in the plan, use assets from inside of the solo 401k to fund the policy. You're a little more limited in terms of access to the funds to use for investing, et cetera, things like that. So it'd more likely be a scenario where you value the insurance itself, and that's why you want it inside of the plan. And I'll kind of hit on a thought, Blake, and then I'll let you give me your thoughts. But typically in a situation like that, if someone's saying, well, I have this money in the 401k, but I would actually rather have it outside of the 401k for investment purposes. And why? Because, well, everything I build inside of the 401k is going to be taxable at whatever point I make distributions or I pass it on to my kids, and all of a sudden it becomes taxable to them. And so I want to build my wealth, but I don't want to build a nest egg for Uncle Sam too, right? I want to take some of that money out and then use it for building wealth outside of a qualified plan, and therefore it doesn't become all taxable. Then, building a plan where we fund a policy and using it for investing can be great. Do you have any additional thoughts?
I really don't. I think you hit on the things that came to my mind as well.
Okay, perfect.
So we do have another question, but before we get to that, what I'm going to do is in the chat, I'm going to put a calendar link to everyone. So if you are already working with us, you're working with Rod, myself, Brennan, feel free to reach out to us with any specific questions of like how your policy could potentially play out down the road, what your options would be. If you're not working with one of us, feel free to use that calendar link, and we'd be more than happy to jump on and answer any questions that you have. So you're welcome to do that. And Miguel has another great question, which I'm really glad you brought this up. He says, who would be advising on the best strategy to follow 15, 20, 30 years down the road in case that you are not around, or recommendations for our descendants and things like that? So, Rod, you want to hit on just our structure at Money Insights?
Sure.
Obviously, all of these strategies, that we were just looking at, we're literally talking many decades that these are going to play out. It's called, permanent life insurance for a reason, because the entire goal of this is that you eventually will pass away with the policies intact. So with that being said, knowing that we're looking at a 50, 60, 70 year potential horizon, how does that look for Money Insights? How is that going to play out down the road for people who are working with us?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say that the advantage of working with a team like Money Insights, as opposed to maybe just an individual agent out there who's kind of building their own practice, is that really that word team. And so if you're working with me, I'm now 50 years old. I'll be working for the foreseeable future, but there will come a time when I'll work less, right? I'll be on this same track in terms of slowing down on my work, situation, and kind of phasing into some sort of retirement existence. And but we have people like Blake on our team. Many of you know Brennan. So these are guys in their 20s, 30s who are equally as capable as I am in helping anyone through any of these conversations, and we'll continue building our team and like that. So the whole idea is that we're able to help you today with what you want today, and also as we're looking into the future over the life cycle of the plan, which does carry out over decades, but that we'll have team members here that will continue helping you along the way. So that's plan A. But then the next question is, okay, but what if something happens, either to Money Insights as a team, as a company, or to any individual within the team, and so then plan B is that any individual can carry on even independent of Money Insights and continue to help you out. But especially the kinds of things that we're talking about right now in this conversation, even though a lot of the things that we do are very specialized in terms of the investment optimizer, in terms of the capital avalanche, if you're looking at the life cycle of the investment optimizer and phase two, this, again, it's a very common conversation to be had. And so even if our whole team got hit by a bus, and then the insurance carrier would help you find an agent that is qualified to continue having that conversation with you, and you just want to be specific with them, right? So you'd be calling them up saying, hey, what would you recommend right now? They would most likely put you in touch with a local like agency manager or something, and then they would help handpick someone that could work with you for the remainder of continuing out your plan. And so that's another kind of common situation as far as a plan B, right? Plan A, you're good, Money Insights continues to go, but if something were to happen, then that would be kind of the fallback.
And I might just add to that personally, if you look around like the insurance kind of financial services industry in general, a huge percentage of people are working individually, or they're kind of a one-man show or a two-man show. And I've kind of seen some of the downfalls of doing that on the later end of the practice, and where that leaves people moving forward. So just to reiterate what you're saying, Rod, I truly believe it's really important to be working with a team that has a structure to be around for decades. Todd is asking about a current situation that he has involving premium finance. Todd, I would say feel free with that specific situation to reach out to Rod or I. So our emails are blake@moneyinsightsgroup.com or rod@moneyinsightsgroup.com. Feel free just to shoot us an email, and I can put that in the chat as well, our emails, and we would be happy to take a look at that as well.
Yeah. And Todd, I know you and I have talked in the past, so I'd be more than happy to help you look at that.
Yeah, Rod would be the best one. So it's rod@moneyinsightsgroup.com if you don't already have that. Here's one last thing I'll say for those of you who are still on. If you have any topic ideas for these IWB webinar series, feel free to shoot us an email and let us know. We want these to be as helpful and educational as possible. So we're more than happy to address anything that you feel like would be helpful. And with that being said, thanks so much for being on, and we'll catch you on the next one.